All right, so it's 2 p.m. Central European time. I think it's Central European summer time right now, but so let's get started. In the next 40 minutes, we're going to talk about provisioning Microsoft Teams. There are many ways to provision a team, and we're going to touch upon a few of them, of course, during this session. It's going to be a relatively technical session, so bear with me. But I think, well, personally, I think everyone needs a provisioning solution, so we'll be quite okay. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Thomas Vochten. I'm a technology evangelist. I know it's a mouthful. For the Kronos Group, which is a large technology group in Belgium. I'm also a Microsoft MVP, which basically means I like talking about technology a lot. I'm also the president of the Belgian Information Worker User Group. That's also a mouthful. And we have regular events focused on Microsoft 365, such as Microsoft Teams and related technologies, such as the Power Platform. And we also organize Collab Days Belgium, and that's the event formerly known as SharePoint Saturday Belgium. So if you've got any questions after this session, feel free to reach out to me. Best way probably is to reach me is through Twitter, but you can even send me an email if you want. That's not a problem. Okay, provisioning Microsoft Teams. So why are we here actually? Is this necessarily something you need? Is this a potential problem? Is this something your organization needs to think about? A fellow MVP, Joanne Klein, put out a Twitter poll. I know it's not really scientific, but a Twitter poll last year about, okay, what do people use for Teams provisioning in their organization? And she provided 4 different answers. 34% of people answered, well, we let IT create Microsoft Teams in our organization. We'll get back to that. 35%, so well, almost the same, said, well, we just let end users create their teams when they need a team. 27%, so just a little bit less, they said, no, we have a provisioning solution in place. And 4% others. I don't know what other means. Maybe that means they don't use Teams because I don't see, well, that many alternatives to the 3 options above. That already paints quite a good picture on how people are using provisioning solutions or not in their organization. Most customers I meet, they are tempted to go for option 1 or option 2. And I think it's a bit of a mix actually, in my experience. Well, you can have your teams created by your IT department. I've seen organizations where if you needed or if you wanted a new team, you would call the help desk or fill in some kind of form, and then in the end, someone from IT would create your team. That usually, but not always, don't get me wrong, usually also leads to some potential problems like, well, I want a team now. I want to have something available to me now, or I have a new project I have got. I'm part of a virtual team in the organization. I don't know. I need a team now. So I fill in a form, and then I have to wait 3 days for IT to honor my request. Hopefully, it's not 3 days, and I've been in IT departments myself, so I know what's going on behind the scenes, of course. But sometimes that creates a little bit friction. The upside of letting your teams be created by IT is obvious, of course. IT has complete control. They know which teams exist in the organization, which is often something that IT departments want to know to control sprawl or having lots of teams, lots of groups, because every team is a group, you know, in their organization. In my experience, or in my opinion, that is maybe not too valid of a reason. There are some important things there to know. That's true, but still, many organizations let teams be created by IT departments. The other hand is, well, let's just our end users create their teams when they need one. Personally, I don't think that's a bad idea. For many organizations, it's a big no-no. We should not let end users create teams themselves because, again, sprawl, or because we want to implement a certain naming convention, or we want to avoid people creating duplicate teams for stuff that already exists, etc., etc. So many different reasons, but today we're going to touch upon provisioning solutions. We are going to create our own. Well, there is an existing solution that you can leverage. We'll get back to that. But the upside is that we're going to use ready available components to use so that you can customize and have complete control if you want. Of course, there are also provisioning solutions out there on the market provided by some well-known provisioning solutions by some well-known vendors, and those can be perfectly valid for you. But in this session, we're going to talk about how you can create something yourself that fits your needs. So let's maybe take a step back and look at why again would you want to look at a real provisioning solution. I try to avoid to put the G word on this slide, governance. But of course, governance is one of the main reasons that you might want to go for a provisioning solution. The first one I've already touched upon, to avoid teams or groups creation sprawl. I've seen small organizations just rolling out Microsoft Teams, letting end users create their teams, and it was a small organization, like 25 users, and in a few weeks they had like, I don't know, 200 teams, something like that. I've seen that happen. Is that a bad thing? Probably it is. Maybe it isn't. But yeah, you know where I'm getting to. You might want to control this at least a little bit, at least to give the users a tool, or to give the users the opportunity to at least think about, okay, why am I creating this team again, and what is the purpose of this team? But if end users can just create a team by themselves, you're not enforcing anything, so they can do whatever they want, of course. Something else that I've seen happen all the time is we want to reduce manual intervention. Many organizations, maybe not the IT department creates their teams, but let's say a secretary somewhere. And you ask the secretary, well, could you please create a team for this department or that department, or it can even be the IT department themselves. But well, often it involves a checklist of a naming convention, of the amount of default channels that you want to have, certain apps that you want to be there, that you want to have deployed, stuff like that. But if you're creating a lot of teams and someone has to do this, maybe an IT department, maybe a secretary, maybe a project manager, maybe someone else, well, you have an increased risk for errors. People forget stuff, etc., etc. So that's leads to less mistakes and errors. Basically, that's what we want. Some organizations let their users free, and they say, well, you can not only create the teams you want, but you can also make your team look or behave like you would, like you want. So it doesn't really matter for them. So, but if you should go for a provisioning solution, I think less mistakes and errors also leads to teams being a little bit more predictable and consistent, and that also, in my opinion, helps user adoption because people know where to go and how to use this. A big one, of course, is to enforce. It allows you to enforce some governance policies around teams. Very typical examples of governance solutions would be security settings, or maybe you want to make sure that every team has at least 2 owners, something like that, something that can be enforced through a provisioning engine, or some specific compliance settings or labels that you want to set, or some other security related policy or property for your teams. Another big one is often lifecycle for the team itself, or for certain parts or certain content. You maybe want to, I don't know, enable or disable the use of our private channels, something very common, or guest access. That's a very typical one. And I already mentioned it, consistency supports user adoption in a big way. So if the initial structure and if the initial content is recognizable for users, sometimes that helps for user adoption. A big part of making teams, let's say, predictable is of course the use of templates. And Microsoft Teams templates were introduced already some time ago. There are quite a few templates out of the box available to you. This is maybe even not the definitive list of built-in templates, but there are a lot. You don't have to start from a default empty theme if you don't want that. There are many built-in templates available. Well, the cool thing about these built-in templates is that it's not just a name and maybe a channel. Some of these built-in templates also contain specific applications. So this is an example of the manage an event built-in template, or base template as they call it. It has, of course, a few default channels, well, general, obvious, but announcements, a budget, something to manage the content of the event, something to do with planning, etc., etc. So default channels, and then also some default applications that are already configured and connected to this theme that you're creating. So a wiki, I prefer OneNote, by the way, and then a website, YouTube, but also something very specific like employee IDs or an issue reporter, which are small, well, let's call them applications already configured for managing an event and already tied into these templates automatically. So that's quite cool, actually. And I must say, I use quite a few of these built-in templates myself. Oftentimes they fulfill the need, but if you're in a larger organization, might not be sufficient for what you want. So, but if all you need is a template, because when I talk to customers about provisioning solutions, it's oftentimes about, yeah, we want a team for a project always to have this and this channel, and we want to always have a OneNote tab and always have a connection to our CRM system, whatever. Well, a Teams template might be everything that you need, and it stops there. So then you might not even need a real provisioning solution that like the one we are going to build today. So if you allow end users to access or to create their teams themselves, they will be presented with a dialog box on the left, create a team from a template, you choose a template, and you're done. And through the Teams Admin Center, you're also able to curate the list of available templates. So if you don't want to make let's say the first one on my list here, the tech train, which is an event event team, if you do not want that, make it available, that's possible. You can just, with a few checkboxes, remove that from the list if you want. So that's fairly obvious. It's fairly easy. So that's not a problem. You can also create your own templates if you want. You can do that. The easiest way is through the Teams Admin Center. You're able to create one from scratch and then provide some channels and some applications like you see on the screenshot. It's all relatively easy. But you can also create a template from an existing team or clone an existing template that you want to modify. But again, if templates is all that you need, you might already be done now. You might not need something additional, like approvals or something. If you're a developer, you can also create these teams with a little bit more control, of course, through the Microsoft Graph. We're going to touch upon the graph later on in the presentation. And you're able to create a template in JSON format that specifies all the properties, all the behavior, all the connected applications, installed applications for your Teams template, and then create your own if that's what you want. But I see most customers nowadays, for simpler scenarios, go through the Teams Admin Center for most of their templating needs. Now, if you want to use a template without a provisioning engine, someone still has to create a team manually through the Teams interface. And then we're looking at this button here, the Join or Create a Team button. Because if you are going to implement a Teams provisioning solution, well, you should take into account that by default, everyone has the right to create a team or a group, because it's groups that sits behind the creation of teams. So if you're using a provisioning engine and you want to use a provision engine, of course, you should probably disable this button. Now, there's a procedure on how to accomplish that through PowerShell. It involves creating a group and with people who are able to create groups in your tenant, and then putting some IT people and account for your provisioning engine in there, and then everything should be okay. You have to be very careful though, because, or you have to be aware at least, that if you disable this, if you remove people from this group, or you don't add everyone, that's the same thing, it has some certain repercussions for other applications, because you're effectively removing the right to create groups in the whole tenant for certain people or for almost everyone. So if you want to create a group in Outlook or in Planner, if you create a new project plan, or in Yammer or other connected group, connected applications, they will not have the permission to do that anymore. So be very, very careful. Maybe test out a few scenarios to make sure that this solution fits your needs. But well, it's basically the only real way to prevent people from creating a team from the Teams interface. So you probably have to go to this through this method. Right, back to the provisioning engine. What kind of technologies, what kind of components are available to us when we want to create a provisioning engine? Like I said, you can go to a third-party tool, but if you look inside of the box, inside Microsoft 365 and Azure, because Azure also provides a lot of components, of course, these are a few examples of what I see people use to create their own provisioning engine, and most of them on this slide we're effectively going to use in our own provisioning solution. So some people, especially when it's a developer-oriented organization, they tend to go for a completely custom web application. So something in, I don't know, ASP.NET, something running in Azure somewhere else, probably using, well, almost definitely using the Microsoft Graph to create a team, and the application itself, it gathers input from the user and it does some custom logic with some custom code, totally custom. That's fine. That might absolutely suit your needs. But there are also other things available to you. Things like the Power Platform, Power Automate. Of course, we are going to use Power Automate for approvals in our provisioning solution that I will show you. Power Apps for the user interface. Azure Automation is something that can be used. Azure Automation is a way to run PowerShell in the cloud unattendedly. You can also create teams through PowerShell. So there might be an automation solution there. Azure Functions, also typically something that developers like to use, but you can also provision Microsoft Teams through PowerShell running in an Azure function. So that's something that I also see happen quite a few times. Developers really love Azure Functions. And then, well, Azure Logic Apps, something else. Azure Logic Apps is really comparable to Power Automate. It shares the same base, let's say. And in our solution, we are going to leverage Azure Logic Apps for various reasons. We could have gone for Power Automate, but yeah, licensing and a few other technical requirements made us go to Azure Logic Apps. PowerShell, we touched upon that. Also able to leverage the Microsoft Graph to create teams. There are also native PowerShell commandlets that you can use to create a team. A solution based on SharePoint is also possible, less common. We are going to use SharePoint in our solution, but more for the backend storage, let's say, to make our application work. And also through the PnP provisioning engine, which is also free, you can also create teams. So there are of course more technologies available to you to create your own provisioning engine than I can possibly fit on this slide. But it might give you an idea about, well, you don't have to go to something completely custom. If you leverage the out-of-the-box solutions through Microsoft 365 or the Power Platform, you can go a really long way. So I'm a consultant, so I say it depends a lot, but in this case, it really depends. It depends when to use what. If you look at the previous slide, lots of technologies available to you. When do you choose what? Well, it's a little bit yeah, it depends on different factors, of course, on what you are used to using. If you're a developer, if you're an IT professional, if you have to hire someone, cost, licensing. We talked about Power Platform licensing enough already in the community, I think, but you get the idea. How complex your requirements are. If you just want to enforce a naming policy, that's something completely different than if you want to enforce your naming policy, do approvals, and do 25 different security settings, might be something different. Security and scaling requirements, of course, also come into play here. So I think, well, looking at it from a distance, make your choice and do it wisely. So the provisioning solution I'm going to present to you today is a free solution. We'll get back to that later on, and it uses quite a few components and services actually. So it's a little bit more technical, this slide, but bear with me. So what are the solution elements that we are using in our provisioning solution? First of all, Azure Active Directory, of course. That's fairly self-evident, I think. So we need to have authentication, we need to have authorization, just to make sure that everything is working. So that's a no-brainer. For the user interface, probably also quite self-evident, as we're going to use Power Apps. Power Apps is a great way to not just create simple forms, but also really cool applications, of course. And the nice thing is that you can integrate Power Apps with Microsoft Teams. So we are creating a provisioning engine for Microsoft Teams inside of Microsoft Teams, which is also quite cool. You don't have to send people a link to a separate web application. No, they can just go to Teams, click on a pre-installed application if you want, or go to a tab where the application is installed to request a new team. And the cool thing is that not only the requesters can go to Teams, also the people who have to approve when teams are created can stay in Teams. Because if we want to be flexible and if we want to be fast, remember how we talked about how IT departments created Microsoft Teams? Well, you don't want an IT department to go to their mailbox all the time to see, okay, has someone requested a team? No, we want them to stay in Teams too. So that's entirely possible. For the backend storage, we're using Microsoft SharePoint in this case. So we're storing the Teams requests in SharePoint, but we're also storing the settings for the application inside of SharePoint. Settings might be things like which templates do you want to make available? For example, do you want to enable some compliancy settings? That's all going to be stored in Microsoft Teams. We're also Microsoft SharePoint. We're also going to use SharePoint for some more technical configuration parameters, like, okay, which tenant are we working in, which is the service account, stuff like that. But the actual requests will also be managed from within SharePoint. From a user interaction perspective, as when it comes to the approvals, we're going to use Power Automate to make an approval flow, and also adaptive cards. And if you don't know what adaptive cards are, so adaptive cards are a way to create small little cards, for example, in a chat functionality of Microsoft Teams, and I'm going to show you that, so that users can, from within the chat, and the approvers can, from within the chat, approve the team creation. So they don't have to go to a separate application somewhere. No, they can just on their mobile, for example, or on Microsoft Teams, approve or reject the creation of the team. And Power Automate is the engine that we're going to leverage to do the actual approval and to have the workflow. Then the engine itself that is used, it's fairly, well, I would say, well, complicated. Maybe there are quite some components here. So this is the backend engine that is going to take care of the actual creation of the Microsoft team. I already told you that we are going to use Logic Apps and not Power Automate for different reasons. From within Logic Apps, the whole orchestration of the team's creation will be done. So it will check if the team already exists, for example. It will check if all the members exist. It will add the owners. It will do the actual team creation. It will make sure the right template is fetched from SharePoint and then instantiated through the Graph API. That's all done through Logic Apps, and it's a fairly big Logic App, as you will see. We don't want to store usernames and passwords in the cloud, so we're using Key Vault to do that in a secure way. So we have things like an app ID and a secret. We're going to be coming back to that later. That's stored in a Key Vault. This version of the app that I'm using today is using an automation runbook, which runs PowerShell in the cloud. A newer version doesn't use that anymore, but I've got the previous one configured. And then with PowerShell in the automation runbook, we are also doing some checks. And in the end, the approver and the requester also gets an email. So lots of different components. It makes for a great demonstration, and it also allows you, because everything here on this slide is open, you can leverage that in your own solution and also change the solution after you've deployed it. So this is the basic flow that we're going. It's not a Microsoft flow. The basic, well, let's say, flow of how we are going to request the team. We request a new team. We should provide some additional information, obvious ones like the name, the owner, and the template. And then we check if the team already exists. Then we get approval. So the approval with the adaptive card kicks off, and then the team eventually will be created. All right, let's look at how that works. Let me share my browser. So with a little bit of luck, you will see that I already have a few teams created. I'm logged in as the administrator for demonstration purposes, so I'm going to be requesting and also approving my teams. It's a little bit more convenient. So there are different ways this application might work. You might have, in this case, a deployment team where we can, in the general channel or in the provisioning channel, have a tab for our application. The application is called Request a Team. And welcome to the Request a Team application. Or you can also, and that's probably also a good idea, integrate it into Microsoft Teams itself by uploading it as an application here, Request a Team. So let's try that. It's exactly the same. So this is a Power App that we're looking at. And as I said, I'm logged in as a user of an app and also as an approver, so I can do everything here. People are able to request a new team here from scratch or using a template. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to do from scratch because it's just a little bit faster. So click Build a New Team. Then I arrive on a screen where you can ask some typical questions like, well, according to your governance policy, in this case, the visibility of the team is going to be public. Anyone in your organization can join. And then some team information. Let's call it Teams Nation, and then a check availability button. Now, this check availability button kicks off a Power Automate flow that checks if the team already exists. We'll get back to the technical details later on. So the team name is available, and I can go on. A description, Teams rocks, and then also a valid business reason. And this is of course one of the reasons why you have a provisioning engine, because you want to gather some more information than what is available to out of the box. So the business reason, in this case, doesn't really matter. Just because I want one. I want a new team to be created. But this is something custom, of course. Next, then we add members and owners. In our case, we want every team to have at least 2 owners for lifecycle purposes. So the first owner is myself, this one, and a second owner, the infamous Dan Jump. And then you're also able to specify a few members, up to 2 in this case. But for performance reasons, I will not do that now because the engine takes a little while to run. All right, let's click next. You're able to review your choices and then submit. The request is submitted, and the application tells you, well, you can follow up on your application to from within the application to go to the check status tab here. It's called My Requests, and I submitted one yesterday, and well, I've got a new request today. So I submitted one, Perfect. Now, what happens now in the background is this request goes to the approver, can also be a group of people. In my case, it's the same person. So with a little bit of luck, in a few seconds, I will get a notification from within Microsoft Teams to get this created. And you see Flow sent me a card here. So I can or click on this button here or go to the chat. So the approvers don't have to leave Teams, as I told you. So we've got a pending approval. There's a team requested by this person here with all the different parameters that we specified, and I can approve or reject right from within the application. It's probably a good idea to approve and then submit. Go, submit. Now, what happens in the background is the request itself is stored in a SharePoint list. So this is the SharePoint list, and also the state of the request is kept in SharePoint. So depending on the state, the Power Automate flow kicks off or the Logic app kicks off. So when I issue a new request, this one Teams Nation, it will end up in SharePoint with all the choices that I made. And you see that it's approved already because I clicked approved. But you've got different states here, and depending on the status, a different part of the engine does its work. The user interface itself is this is the Power App. Well, we already looked at the Power App. We're not going to look at the editor itself, but it's a relatively simple app. That's all. I know that's always easier said, but all right. Let's quickly go back to SharePoint because I forgot to show you something. There's also a list that holds the team request settings. So this was the administrative settings that I talked about. So things like the tenant URL and different kinds of security things, features that you want to enable upon team creation can also be configured here in a dynamic way so that it can influence your application. Also, the Teams templates that you want to make available can also be configured here. So you can also do that in the Teams Admin Center, but this is specifically to our application. All right, so this was the Power App. Then we've got the Power Automate. Remember, that was one of the boxes on the slide. We've got one here for check team availability. Remember when we clicked the button on the Power App, this flow would kick off. It's gathering a few variables, and it will check if the site exists. And in this case, we're doing that to the SharePoint API. So there are other ways to do that, I know, but this is how we do it here. And if the team doesn't exist already, we can approve it, and the team's request approval is also done through Flow. You don't have to take screenshots or something because everything we showed today is available to you open source. So I'm going to share the link afterwards. So in this case, we are going to use Power Automate with adaptive cards. It's somewhere in here. We don't have time to dive into all the details, but it's relatively straightforward again. So the flow in this case, or the Power Automate flow, reacts on when something changes in the Teams request SharePoint list that we already saw. So that's how it's all orchestrated, let's say. So the actual engine, so the big work, is done through an Azure Logic app. This is my Azure subscription, and this is my Logic app. It's called Process Team Request. The cool thing about Logic apps is that it's very dynamic. That's very powerful. Let's have a quick look at how the Logic app looks like. It's quite a big one. So again, this Logic app kicks off if someone approves a request, and that ends up in the SharePoint list. So when an item is created or modified in our Teams requests list, we will do something. So we will first update the status again from approved to team creation, so that we know that the team is actually being created. We initialize a lot of variables again. That's what we want to do. We get the client ID and the secret when we get that from Key Vault. client ID and secret are needed to authenticate and to authorize our application through the Microsoft Graph, so that our application can actually create teams on behalf of the approver or the requester. We do some additional checks. We also check if the SharePoint site exists for various reasons. Then we loop through the members, loop through the owners, and put that all in a data format. And then we can go and create the team. First, we check if there is a template that we want to use. In this case, or in our case, we didn't want to use a template, so we're going to clone. We're going to clone a team, a default team. So that's how it gets created. It's Logic App, so there is a little bit of JSON involved here, and then we wait for the team to provision. And then the team will get created. We get a reference to the team, etc., etc. So we don't have time, unfortunately, to go over every detail and every setting here, but you get the idea. The main thing here is that we're using the Microsoft Graph to interact with the teams creation. So that's how it works. So we add members and owners, and then we post a welcome message to the general channel in the team that we just created. With a little bit of luck, that will already be done when we return to Teams in a few minutes. So we post a welcome message, and then we do some cleaning up. We send also an email to the creator, and we update the status in the SharePoint list so that the team has been created and everyone is notified. I went through the Logic App fairly quickly. I realized that, but that's in the interest of time, because we only have a few minutes. We only have a few minutes left here. So let's go back to our Microsoft team. Let's go to our Teams list. It's not created yet, so it's probably still doing its work somewhere. There are some waits involved. Now, this team, Inspire, that's something I created using the exact same method yesterday. So you can see the team has been created. We've got the different channels. We've got the welcome message that I talked about just a few seconds ago. So this welcome to your new team. We have channels, we have integration, we have a certain template that has been used, and we also have the right members, the same members here. In this case, I also added some additional members to the team. So the team has been provisioned exactly how we wanted it to be provisioned. And if you're wondering, okay, what is happening with the current request, you can also go back to Logic Apps if you're interested. We're going to refresh this, and then you can. And I know what I forgot. I didn't do my sacrifice to the demo gods this morning, because this Logic App by default only runs once a day. So I should have clicked run trigger here to run one now. But in any case, if it would still be running, it hasn't started yet, then you could click on the run here and look at the history. And it's also really cool if you want to debug something, or if you're wondering, okay, why is my flow or why is my Logic App still waiting somewhere? You can, in every step, you can go here and look what the inputs were, what the outputs were, if there are any errors. That's quite cool. So even while the Logic App is running, you're able to do that. You're able to do that here. So it's really cool. The nice thing about Logic Apps is that you can, of course, do that and change everything if you want. Last but not least, everything I showed you is free for you to use, to manipulate, to reconfigure, to change if you want. The URL is included in the slide deck. So, but if you go to GitHub, or if you Google for Office Dev Microsoft Teams app request a team, then you're able to download this solution. Basically, you get a deployment folder with some prepackaged application, a prepackaged Microsoft Flow, some PowerShell if you want. Well, if you want some PowerShell to deploy the solution, and it's all open source. So if you want to specify, or if you want to file some issues, or even do a pull request, that's entirely possible. Let's go back to the slides. So that was the quick demonstration. So if you want to leverage this request a team app yourself, you head over to this website. So everything is available to you there. All right. If you're sufficient, or if you use the Power Platform a lot, you will probably already during this session thought about, well, the Power Platform, doesn't that have built-in team creation capabilities? Yes, it does. So in Power Automate, you can also mimic what we did today. It's a little bit more limited, but it's entirely possible. So in preview, you've got a few you have team connector with some actions like create a team, but it's not as flexible as what I showed you today, but it is possible. And if you want to go a step further, what you can also use is Power Virtual Agents, which is a way to create chatbots yourself. You're also able to create a provisioning engine, for example, by letting users talk to a chatbot. Please create me a team, and then the bot will ask you some questions, and then the team will get created. So you can be creative if you want. That can also absolutely work. All right, we had to go quite fast actually, but we're already at the end of the presentation. So some key takeaways. There's no one size fits all. So many different components are available to you to leverage to create your own provisioning solution. The cool thing is that you can leverage Team itself as a part of your solution. So I especially like the fact that this provisioning engine is an application in Teams itself. So that's quite cool. If you want to embark on a Teams provisioning engine, you always have to get acquainted with the Microsoft Graph. Even if you're using Power Automate and you're not going for logic apps, please read up on your Microsoft Graph knowledge. Even if you're an IT professional and you want to just leverage PowerShell to do all this, it's entirely possible, but read up on how the Microsoft Graph enables you to create and manage teams. There are a lot of choices, components-wise, technology-wise, so go for what you are comfortable with. I think that's always good. That's always a good philosophy. Dive into the Power Platform, the built-in connectors. Maybe try to work something out in Power Virtual Agents. It's really cool. Your users will absolutely love this. But also don't dismiss PowerShell. You can also create teams through PowerShell if you want. All right, some useful links, and the slides will be made available to you afterwards. So the link again to the application that I demonstrated, and then the link to a few blog posts of friends and colleagues of mine with some more information and background information on what kind of elements are important when you want to create teams or create your own provisioning engine. And last but not least, the Microsoft Graph Teams documentation. All right, we're already at the end of the presentation. I want to thank you for being here. I hope you got something out of the presentation. Please rate this session. Presenters love when their session gets rated. Gives us a good idea on what to improve or what to do next. So thank you for being here and enjoy the rest of the conference.